everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Jessica Henry Gray, and I'm excited to have you with me. Today I'm going to work a little bit on this oak tree. It is a massive oak tree that I encountered in South Carolina, Charleston. It is called the angel oak. And so it's an incredible honor to paint this, and I'm super excited. So I will show you a little bit more about how I worked through the progress of working on this painting. And I did film a little bit of the plein air experience that I did down there in Charleston. So I'll show you some little clips of that, and then I'm bringing it back here to my studio to finish it. So today I'm going to talk about just painting some of these limbs and how to work through capturing that atmosphere in and around branches that is so common in painting trees. Trees are one of the most magnificent things to paint, and I just love going out and sketching just trees, even sketching them in oil paints or watercolors, and you can do that too. So I'm going to show you some pictures here of other experiences that I have done. So I'm going to jump into this today, and let's roll the intro, and I'll see you on the other side. Today. I am here in Charleston, South Carolina, and this is a really special place. This is an angel tree, the angel oak, and I'm gonna paint this. It is absolutely majestic, and there's something spiritual. Anyway, so I'm excited to share this, and we are gonna jump in. Today, and I'm probably gonna tone it more in the Sienna family. You might automatically think green because there's so much green, but being that Sienna's sort of the opposite, I'll play with the green more and it'll come through and be really an interesting play on that. And using my sketch, just map out the overall idea of where I want everything. One ends down here. So if that's my scale, then everything else has to fit in here. Okay, all right, so then the trunk, blocking in some general locations of where these anatomical aspects of the tree are going to be. Right here is a big part of the trunk. It's challenging to paint something so big, so small. But if you think about it as maybe just doing someone's portrait on a little tiny canvas, it makes it a little bit more doable. Let's come back to this one. As things start to kind of take a better scale, better perspective of each other. I like painting them this way because I can concentrate more on every little angle as it turns instead of drawing squiggly lines and a million squiggly lines like that. by giving little choppy indications of a branch, I can look at the different angles a little more slowly. So, squinting back at my tree. Oh, this hat makes it easier. Oh. I've got my darkest dark on here, and I just want to pull out the areas where I see a really strong dark.
I love this part. Oh,
thanks. Gently curving the branches. And you can press on one side and lift as you curve, to get a little bit of interesting form in there. Ones are.
And where you have your underpainting showing is so perfect. The branches, that color of the underpainting.
Yeah, so I'm noticing some of that ochre that comes through, that sienna.
Yeah.
Almost like you don't have to do highlights.
Right, that's why I toned it, so that you do that in case any of it shines through. It's got a good color base, and so you don't have to feel like you have to fill everything in. But see, there's so much more sensitivity to the tenderness of this tree when you can take the time and put little marks instead of just drawing out the lines. Just be sensitive to that. You don't have to get it completely accurate, but to just savor that. Like I said, I'm not getting all the branches in, but we'll get some. And I know that there's some background over here that I'll get that I haven't got yet. That I always feel that when you can start to put the middle tone on the tree, that's when you really start feeling the form happen. And you can cut back into the foliage too, just like you use the foliage to cut into the existing branches. You can use the branches to carve away at too much foliage or misplaced foliage. All right, so that branch that's going like that over there, I'm going to grab a little bit more sienna and yellow ochre into that. Okay, so let's see, I want a few more really bright highlights on this tree. So yeah, cad yellow and white, that's my sunshine. So now I just need to select places where it's going to be hitting its strongest. So there. There. I want this going down like that too. Spaces up here. Occasionally a branch gets hit with some sun. And so I will see you back in the studio. So on my palette at different times throughout the filming of this tree, I have titanium white. Then I have cadmium yellow lemon. This is cadmium yellow medium, cadmium red light, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. And then this one, the bright blue, is cerulean blue. The purple there is cobalt violet. The next one over is quinacridone magenta. Then I have my regular alizarin permanent right there. I have quinacridone red, this bright red right here. Then I have permanent rose right next to it. So then I have my regular phthalo green, emerald green, the bright one, radiant turquoise, Prussian blue, and cobalt blue is my last one. So if you want to know how each of these colors work, I suggest mixing a little bit of white with them, and that gives you a better idea and a better perspective of the actual colors that they will come out to be. Now you'll see some of my tubes, most of them are Gamblin brand, some of them say 1980, and what that means is that this one compared to this Gamblin is a little bit inferior in quality. So these are the prices that these paints would have been back in 1980. So they're made probably with a little bit more filler, whatever. They're still, I mean, you can see from, that is the 1980 and that is the regular Gamblin Cad Yellow Medium. Now, and this is also 1980 for the Cad Red Light. I find that for these really expensive colors, these are like $36 tubes like this, to buy these cadmiums in a 1980 line, they really do a good job. Their color payout is still really excellent. So I don't have a problem getting those. I wouldn't recommend them for your staples, like the yellow ochre, burnt sienna, or ultramarine blue. These are fairly reasonably priced anyway, you know, $8 a tube. So I would recommend just sticking with a better quality for those. And then I have some other ones on my palette here that are Winsor Newton, and these are fine for just some colors I pick up every now and then. I just want to try some colors you just simply cannot mix in nature, and so I use some different magentas for those, and I have some different shades of blues that I will be playing with as well. All right, now some of this video is going to be voiceover and some is just going to be me talking. Now this canvas here is 24 inches tall by 48 inches across, so a 2-foot by 4-foot canvas, pretty big. Now I went ahead and toned the canvas in the same sienna mixture that I used when I did the plein air demonstration in Charleston. And I'm beginning by just figuring out, exactly like I did with the plein air sketch, my boundaries within this canvas. I know it's shaped a lot different, much longer than my plein air study, and that's okay too. That is one thing I didn't really care for about the little plein air, is that it was almost a square, and this one is stretched out, and which makes more sense because the tree itself is longer and more spread out. So I was happy to have this great big canvas and to do this painting on. As soon as I can, I want to start blocking in and massing in some of the darker values. It gives me a sense of where I'm going to be going with the overall design. So even though this is just a little tiny brush, I'm just more or less establishing that there was a value mass around the edges, kind of before I start really nailing the whole size of the trunk. If I can get sort of the feeling and perspective of where I'm going to go with the boundaries, when I make the main trunk, I can sort of better gauge how big it's going to be based on the parameters that I've set. So getting back to this, I'm looking at, I have the plein air study. You can't see it, it's off camera, but I also have some sketches, and then the computer is showing me the photo of the tree while I'm painting. So with all those references, I am analyzing where the trunk is going to go, how big it's going to be, and just carefully laying out the design. And I call them the main arteries of the tree because it just kind of makes sense. If you can, instead of getting overwhelmed by 1,000 branches, just look at the main, 4 or 5 that make up the heart of the tree and where they go, and the angles and the size, and then their relationship to each other. When I get that established, then I start figuring out sort of the negative space in and around the branches and the angles that they go. And you have the freedom to sort of adjust and compensate a little bit for your canvas. And so that is one thing I do like about plein air painting. You have that freedom to be not quite so literal. All right, so in this passage, I have the branches figured out, and I have masked in the overall area where the foliage is going to go. And so I'm taking just a smaller brush now, and I'm rubbing out areas where I want a lighter value, or I want to make sure that I focus on the light filtering through the foliage in these particular passages. So a little bit of thinner on my brush, and sometimes I'll take a little bit of paper towel and I rub it out, and that really helps to just sort of give me that third value in the overall design. Show you here. has a lot of different colors, and I'm gonna pull out even more colors in through here. Like right in here, I have some more magentas and some brighter cadmiums in here showing the ground being reflected up into the branches. So that is, I'm gonna play with that more in here, and I haven't really started on this side yet. So I'm gonna pull this branch down today a little bit more and bring it looking like it's closer at us. Right now I think it looks a little too far back. So I'll be focusing on this branch in this video today, but I wanna show you some other things that I have been working on in the course of this painting. So in my photo reference, the shadow in the ground here is actually really beautiful. Usually shadows in photos turn out flat black like that. So I have to push a little bit more of the colors. Well, in the photos, it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna work on some of that as well. But I worked on this passage in here where the branches are farther away and then some are up close. So to do that, you just have to push the values a little bit more. And also where the light is bouncing up from the ground up into the branches, I'm getting that light in some of them. And then where the sunlight is coming from above, that creates a little bit different effect on each of the branches as well. At the same time, while I'm working on that, I'm working on the background leaves. Now the cluster of leaves on the tree that are farther away are gonna be a cooler blue and sort of a darker kind of olive blue, green. And so I work on getting that a little bit cooler. And the ones that are getting hit with the sunlight are that bright spring green. So I'm gonna, this is not done over here yet. I wanna work on that a lot more, but I will show you a little bit of that today in the process of painting. This side of the tree was getting less light as the morning sun was coming from this direction. You can see on the main part of the tree here. So this is in a cool blue shadow, and occasionally a warm light gets picked up in the leaves. So that's kind of neat, that effect and the overall balance of this whole tree painting, which, by the way, it's 4 feet across and 2 feet tall. And before I'm done, I will be putting little figures in. I just made an indication right here of how big people are compared to this tree. And given that it's about 400 years old, I'm toying with the idea of putting like a tiny little Rembrandt guy silhouette over there and then maybe a modern person on this side, just to show the span of years that this tree might have encountered. Rembrandt could have possibly seen it. Anyway, so that is what I'm going to work on today. My palette today, I have a little bit of refined linseed oil and a little bit of Gal Kid gel in my palette cups. Off to the side over here, I have my odorless mineral spirits, and that is only for cleaning my brushes. And I am getting all set. Today I'm just going to start out with a smaller brush. This is a size 2. Now my first factor here that I have to figure out or think about is adjusting the drawing, because I want this branch here to come lower and closer to me. I want it to feel like it's coming right out at us. And right now it just kind of is on the same plane as the tree. So I want that to want to rework that. So I'm gonna just get a nice little bit of paint, just a kind of a thinned down mixture, because I need to redraw it. So I think that this part here is okay as it comes down and around, but here I think is where we start reworking this configuration. Where do I want it to come all the way down to? So this post, let's bring about to here. Sometimes when people are working on trees, they have a tendency to sort of get lost because there's so many branches, but you just have to get the main arteries, and then you can work on from there, figuring out which branches you need to continue telling your story. You may want all of them, you may not want all of them, but they have to work together. So if you have sort of a branch going nowhere, it has to make sense. bringing this right out at us. And this will be a nice lead-in in the painting as well. Bringing the viewer in. And then the foliage sort of hides that area. And since it's coming right at us, I may just kind of bulge it just a little bit more. Okay, so that feels like it's coming this way. The colors of this particular branch, there's a lot of beautiful colors and roses, rose colors and things like that in there. So I want to play with some of those as they come out of the tree right up in here. So I've started on the whole, there's some mauves and lavenders. I'm taking just that phthalo green that I'm always trying to avoid. I just put a bunch of it on there and it just makes it so pretty. It's a nice, cool blues, so into the shadows, it looks great. And when you need a nice strong dark, I've just been mixing a little bit of the phthalo green with the ultramarine blue, maybe a touch of alizarin. And it gives me one of these dark colors that you see in here. Now when I'm working tree branches, I will often try to work the foliage around it at the same time, because you can use that foliage to help soften edges of your branches. Sometimes the branches need a softer edge as they slip back into shadow. And so I'm going to use that to help me out. It's just straight out cobalt violet. I typically try not to mix cobalt violet with anything because it seems to lose its color payout when you blend it with something else. So if I'm going to use that expensive paint, I kind of just like to let it sing with its own voice. And I'm blocking in the darks on this branch first. A little bit more of this rose and some of the violet of these shadows as they come around. And some of these cross each other because they're branches casting shadows. But always think about how those cast shadows on that branch are defining the form of that branch. Take the time with each arm. It's a portrait. You're painting a portrait of a tree, and so it deserves the integrity and the time you're going to spend with it. Okay, we'll come along down over here. Under the belly, take some of this cerulean blue, and I always just paint my colors together. Here toward the light, the shadow gets skinnier because it's almost all in light. And then here where it turns, we have a nice sort of mauve rose shadow in front. I'm going to take some of that radiant turquoise, just set it off to the side, and paint a little bit in. You don't know how much you need when you grab a color, so you gently paint it together to see if you need more. I think I'd like a little bit more of the rose into that. And paint those colors together. Very peaceful painting colors together. Let's take a little bit of little yellow ochre. Kind of makes a nice orangey color with some of the blue that's already on my brush. tones it down. Gives us sort of a dusty violet. It's good for shadows. And always using my brush to define the form so I can curve my brush strokes around to define this branch coming out of us, or slipping back into shadow, or whatever it's doing. And because these shadows are so purple and blue, it'll be so nice to put the bright orange and yellow highlights and sunlight to really create that contrast. Yellow and radiant turquoise, cad yellow and radiant turquoise. Just slipping that up into here to suggest that grayish shadow as this branch comes out. And some down below too. Those two colors together, yellow ochre with the radiant turquoise, has a really interesting play together that makes it really look like bounced light up into that tree. I don't want to overdo it though. By carefully just putting a few brush strokes down, 1, 2, stop, look at it, assess, does it need more? You can slowly build up the relationship of your brushstrokes to your object. Painting it's all about relationships and how things work together. How does this bounced light work with the shadows? Does it make sense? Is it appropriate? And sometimes when you're out plein air painting, you have to use your eyes more than your understanding of photographs, because this photo flattened all of my shadows up very dark. And when I did the plein air painting, this was a lot lighter. And so I'm referring to my plein air painting just a bit as I'm working on this. I know that the tree is inaccurate in my plein air painting as far as overall drawing, but the colors there and that light atmospheric quality that I'm looking for, it's all in there. Which is the reason we plein air paint, to try to capture those fleeting emotions and feelings that the camera cannot capture, the values and the colors. A bit of cadmium red and cadmium yellow. I paint those together to get an effect of sunlight. Put a little bit of white into there. It will tone it down a little bit if you put some white in it and cool it a little. But on the case of this tree, I find that a little bit of white in my sunlight just looks appropriate. And sometimes you can use the radiant turquoise if you want just the slightest hint of green. I see a little patch of color, like that green. I really do want to play that up, because that's lovely, and I like that there. But I don't want to make all my colors too vibrant, because then the vibrant colors that are there won't really show up as having their own sense of place to shine. Sometimes I just mix directly right on the canvas. Put some colors down, move them around a little bit. Gives it a fresh feeling of not being overworked. And that's a little bit of the Prussian blue with some radiant turquoise, and that's a really pretty blue. I'm going to tone it down a little bit with some burnt sienna. In this segment, I'm just demonstrating how I have a few piles of green mixed up, and I'll make those with different shades of my yellows and blues. Just have them set out, and I'll have two areas of cool greens and warm greens, dark greens and sunlit greens. So there's those greens that are in the shadows that are typically very bluish green, and they can range from a lighter bluish green to a darker bluish green. And then the sunlight passages where the light's really filtering through the leaves, I have that as a very sunny, bright chartreuse, kind of celery green, with it fading down to just a little bit more of a standard grassy green for the lit parts of the green. So to get those really brilliant greens, the bright ones, well, let me just start with the dark ones because that's what I'm working on right here. To get a really dark green, you have to have a very clean brush. You can't have any whites in your bristles to adulterate the mixing because it won't darken. So get a really clean brush, new brush, and then ultramarine blue. You can use a little bit of yellow ochre, but that it has a bit of semi-transparency, semi-opaqueness, so it will lighten it just a little bit. And that's okay if you want that for some passages. To get a true dark green, though, you might want to try your ultramarine blue or phthalo blue with a cadmium yellow, more like a cadmium yellow medium. That'll give it just a subtle hint of green with the yellow in it, but it won't make it really bright because the cadmiums are more transparent, and so they don't sort of permeate a lighter value to your entire mixture. If you want to really push those darks even darker, you can add a touch of burnt sienna, because burnt sienna in ultramarine blue will give you almost black. Okay, so that when you add a little bit of yellow to that, it kind of turns it a little bit more green. just subtle. A little bit of phthalo green and alizarin permanent will give you a nice, really dark green, but don't go too much with the red or it will turn brown. So, so what I'm doing here in this passage is I'm just taking my darker green, going through and really isolating those passages of the dark green mass. And I'm doing the little tiny brush because I knew at the beginning that I really wanted this painting to have just a lot of detail. I'm not a detail fan, but sometimes when all you're painting is just this one thing, I have no problem taking it and pushing it to a higher finish. And I know that when we look at a tree, we don't see every single leaf. Our eyes just don't work that way. But since I was celebrating this tree and it's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, I thought it would be kind of interesting to really just take the time and celebrate it in all of its leaves and values. Just give it its own little integrity. And I was also kind of playing with more that impressionist feeling. And you'll see that throughout this video too, is I really keep that impressionist brushstroke throughout the entire painting. On the ground, in the leaves, the sky. And so anyway, as I'm going along here, that's a little bit of sky color that I'm cleaning up some of the sky holes as they got a little bit lost. Anyway, so as I painted that dark green, and I finished with that just in a passage, you don't have to paint the entire painting in one value. But then I jumped around to sort of a middle tone green and then the spring bright sunny green so that I can sort of see an entire passage how it's all going to play out. Now, adding the sky holes at this stage was really helpful to sort of see where I was going with the air and the atmosphere around things. So I'm really happy with this day's progress. I have a long way to go still, so stay tuned. We're not done with this painting yet. So this is just another quick little video shot of this beautiful tree from a different angle. I'm just so happy to share these with you. It was such a wonderful experience. All right, now back in my studio, I am going to just work on the sky. So I wasn't happy with the transparent background kind of peeking through. And I thought it just isn't really adding anything to the flavor of the overall painting. So I thought I'm going to cover it all up. But since I was there early morning and I really wanted to capture the early morning light as it's filtered through the tree, the sky needed to reflect an early morning effect. So a very sunny, sort of a little yellow, and the blue was very, very faint, just the slightest bit of blue in the sky. So it's mostly a whitish yellow, and I'm getting that with some yellow ochre and a little bit of cadmium yellow to really bring about that sunlight in there. And I hope that that effect gave it that sense of morning sunlight. So I'm approaching the sky a little bit differently than I normally do, and I'm putting down dabs of color. So I'm starting on this other side, and you can see it a little bit more clearly. I wanted, because the light is shining through the tree, and on the back side of the tree, it's hitting the clouds that I'm going to have on this right side of the painting. So there's going to be clouds. They're going to get more of that sunlight yellow. So I'm just putting some color notes down to help me mentally sort of get a grasp of where I want to go with the extreme yellow over here. And I will be toning that down just a little bit because when I paint the whitish color around it, it sort of mixes with it and tones it down a little. But I liked that color note of that yellow because I thought it lent itself well to the feeling of sunlight, early morning, and then also the tree. I didn't think it was distracting from the tree. So I'm working around those dabs of color, trying not to lose the integrity of their intensity. A little bit of lighter blue at the top that has a little bit of yellow ochre in it to create that just a slight warm sunlit effect of the sky in the morning. And then I'm taking some other colors, a little bit white, and then I'm painting it in between there. Now in that impressionistic style, I'm not overly blending the sky. I'm letting each brushstroke have its own integrity, its own sense of space. So if I want to change a color or affect an edge, I just add another piece of color next to it, or I gently move my brush stroke into the adjoining color so that the pieces, like a puzzle, fit together a little bit better. And that's how I would soften some of those edges of these clouds. So I'm piecing together a little bit more of the sunlight effect of these clouds as they kind of gently gradate into the sky. And I'll come back through with more sky color to sculpt around the cloud formations. You can kind of see me doing a little bit of that here, a little bit more of the cobalt blue into that blue mixture. Now down under the cloud, where clouds sort of flatten out at their base, my brush stroke is turning to a little bit more horizontal, and that will sort of help mentally give you the feeling of it being a flat bottom cloud. And then I can play with that, creating the illusion of distance as the other clouds behind it also have that flatness. And you'll see how I kind of work that out a little bit here. And I'm using a little bit of alizarin crimson with a little bit of blue, mostly white, to create that violet shadow color. Little alizarin, little bit of blue. I have some phthalo blue in there. And then down below, I wanted that, where the sky was showing below the clouds, I wanted that to be a lighter blue that has just the slightest warmth to it. By warm, I mean a little bit more in the yellow family. And you can do that with a tiny bit of phthalo green. That will warm it up a little. You can also just, in this case, I had sort of that yellow ochre white mixture going, and I had the slightest bit of blue to it. So that's how I'm getting that warm color of that light blue down below. And so I'm sculpting out the base of those clouds too, using that blue color, so I can sort of form the clouds around the sky in that manner. Now I am beginning to layer the distant clouds, just pushing them back to the background. A little bit more of that light violet color, and then I just sort of stair step them back. A little bit of a horizontal line, and then I'll put a little bit of the yellow above that purple to create the illusion of it being a cloud that goes up and we don't see where the top of it is. And so they stair step away into the distance. Now I'm adding a little bit of that yellow in the sky holes because there was sky behind the tree and it just needed to have that cohesive flavor. Now I'm taking an almost dry brush with some of that sunlit yellow on it and gently dragging it over the surface of the pretty much dry painting beneath, and that's giving the illusion of sunbeams. Given the age and nature of the subject, I felt that adding these sunbeams, and they very well might have been there early in the morning. I thought I saw some, but I didn't mind adding a few and then layering them in and around some branches and just really focusing on where that shaft of sunlight comes through as it hits the highlights on the tree. I thought added an almost spiritual quality to what already felt spiritual. So in that sense, you can take the feeling of a place or a setting, situation, location, and pour a little bit extra into the painting. And that's what I did here. Obviously, it wasn't there when I took the photo. And so likewise, we don't have to be that literally bound to everything we see. In this case, that tree is special. It's just really unique, and so it got its sunbeams. Now the floor, the ground around the tree, I am taking this violet mixture of ultramarine blues, a little bit of alizarin, some of those different pinks that I mentioned earlier, the magentas, and I'm mixing them to create this really nice lavender, almost a dusty lavender for the surface of the ground around it in the shadows. I felt the ground was way too warm and didn't feel cool and shadowy. And since I was pushing the envelope on this painting a little bit, I really loved that lavender feeling to the shadows. So I'm putting it in the tree a little bit where I felt that the ground would be bouncing light up into it, and using the brush strokes to define the form, whether it's on the bark of the tree or a little bit more of that cool blue atmosphere in the tree itself, and then also on the forest floor, on the ground. There's the leaves and whatever's down there. So I take my brush strokes, and you'll see on the ground here, I kind of do small little horizontal strokes, and I do them all across the entire surface of the ground beneath the tree. And I vary them too with little bits of more dusty gray, some a little bit more deeper blue for the shadows, as I have back in here. That's almost straight ultramarine blue, and a little bit of phthalo blue into that, just to create a nice heavy shadow area. I think that it also lent to sort of frame that sunlit passage too, really drawing the eye in. So here again, I'm just working on these little brush strokes across the front to create a nice foreground. To create my people, I start with just a dark shadow, a silhouette, concentrating on the form of the person. If I can see them like this, they're a little bit closer than how they might be like on a distant beach. In this case, I'm cognizant of their form, their back, their spine, their legs, the angle of their head, just their overall gesture. I wanted these two people to be touching the tree. I thought that was sort of an interesting, that's something that you're allowed to do there, just to reach up and touch it. And I thought that, again, that had an overall sense of connection that is important. And I think with any landscape, as soon as you add a beating heart into the scene, it just takes on a different life. And so here we have the sunbeams and I put 5 people in the painting, and a couple of them are touching the tree. I just think it's really interesting. I have another woman off to the side with both of her hands on the tree. And here I have a figure with a little girl, and you can see at the end of the video that they're both looking up at the tree, and I think that that's really special. They're just standing there in the sun, backlit, just looking at the tree. And that concludes this painting and this video. And I'm going to zoom in here and show you up close my figures. There's the woman off to that side and a couple of those figures there touching the tree. Some of the detailed brush strokes. And then there's the dad and his daughter looking at the angel tree. Maybe they have a story. I love that about a painting, that you just never know what the story is and what this tree could tell you if it could speak. I think that's wonderful with painting. All right, thanks everybody. All right, everybody, well, that wraps up this video. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I really do appreciate it. And also, I do hope that you give this a try. I really wanted to show you just a more elaborate tree and how to work out those intricacies of painting something this complex. All right, everybody, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.